Hello and welcome to RHDS Music. In my music interviews, I dive into how musicians got their start in the music industry. In this interview, we feature the legendary John DeChristopher. John was the artist relations at the Zildjian Cymbal Company for over 24 years. And in this interview, we discuss John's humble beginnings at the Simmons Electronic Drum Company, working at DW Drums, and how he got his start at the Zildjian Company. So sit back and enjoy the interview. Hello, we're here with John DeChristopher. I guess you'd say has been around in the industry forever, and musician, and really a legend. And we're talking a little bit about some drum history and some artists. And John, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Rob. Thanks for having me.
So just a little bit of background with you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up just north of Boston in a little town called Melrose, Massachusetts, about 10 miles north of Boston. Yeah.
And so when you were growing up, when did you first get into drums and music, and what were your influences growing up?
I started playing when I was 11. That was in 1972, just before my 12th birthday. And I grew up listening to rock music, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, all those bands from that time. And those drummers, Charlie Watts, Ringo Starr, John Bonham, were my big influences in my sort of formative years as a drummer growing up.
Did you go to a lot of concerts and see a lot of live music when you were growing up?
I did. Yeah, I did. I went to, it was a great time in the 70s to see a lot of these bands. And I saw a lot of bands at the Boston Garden, the old original Boston Garden with no air conditioning. And I can remember many, one band in particular, the Rolling Stones in 1975 in June. And my T-shirt literally clinging to my body because it was so hot in there. And it's just, I've told Charlie Watts that story many times, but how, what it used to be like. But, it was a great time to be growing up as a kid, going to see these bands in those days.
Amazing. So were you studying music? Did you take lessons, or did you go to college, and did you study music, or did you go a different route?
I went a different route. I'm self-taught. So the first 5 or 6 years, I just listened to records, and I got into a band, about a year and a half after I started playing, which was great. I was 13 years old, and I was playing with some local friends, but we were actually playing gigs like high school dances and actually getting paid. And again, those were the things you could do at that time. There were like lots of those opportunities for little garage bands to play gigs. And then I got more serious about it. And a friend of mine who had studied with Alan Dawson here in Boston, he was my age, but much more advanced. His name's Fred Klein, had, sort of helped me along the way, because I didn't really even know, where to buy drumsticks when I first started playing, but he was a great friend that sort of helped point me in the right direction. And then at one point I contacted him and I said, I think I want to learn how to read music. And I studied with him for a little while and got sort of, some of the basics to reading, and really basics, but just to, kind of understand how it works. I didn't really pursue it at that point. I was far enough along where I was, I'd started to develop my own way of playing and playing in bands. And I wish I had, but, pursued it more at that time. But and in terms of college, I had actually applied to Berkeley and had been accepted at that point after I graduated from high school in 1978. But I took a gap year to work at a music store in Boston, where I think we must have met at some point. And I started working at a place called EU Wurlitzer, big music store in Boston, and I ended up staying there for about 4 years, and foregoing college basically, because from there I went on to move out to Los Angeles not long after that, and sort of entered into the industry in 1985. So
How did you, going from Wurlitzer to getting into the industry, how were you able to do that and get a job?
well, I had met a lot of great people along the way working at Wurlitzer, and one person in particular, at the time, in 1982, when Simmons drums became popular, we had a clinic at the store with a man named Glenn Thomas, who had just opened up Simmons in Calabasas, California, the U.S. operation. It's an English company. And Glenn came to Wurlitzer and did a demonstration and a clinic, and we hit it off. I'll back up a second and say that Wurlitzer, we bought this drum set COD, and part of the deal was that we paid for it up front, and by doing that, Glenn said, "I'll come and demonstrate it for you. I'll present a clinic and you know help you sell it." So we had Glenn come in. Right across the street from Wurlitzer, you might remember this, was a recording studio called Synchro Sound, and it was owned by the Cars, the band the Cars, which were a huge band at that time. And they all used to shop at Wurlitzer. David Robinson, the drummer, used to come in quite often, and I knew him a little bit. And so he was there at the clinic that night, him and his drum tech, and a bunch of other people. And he played a lot of electronics at that time. So he was very interested in these Simmons drums. So Glenn does the clinic. He and I go out afterward, have a beer, get to know each other a little bit. The next day, David Robinson and his drum tech come in, and they want to try the drums out. They want to, keep fooling with them. So I've got them set up in the drum room, and I'm trying to demonstrate them as best I can based on what I had learned from Glenn, And so we fooled with them for an hour or so, and they left. And then David's tech came back a little later and said, "We're gonna take this kit. You can put it on our account." So we sold that kit in 24 hours. So Glenn called me. He had heard that we sold it, and looking to order another one. So that began that. It's a little joke that we have even to this day. It began this relationship. And so over the next couple of years, we were selling lots of Simmons. And at one point I said to him, "I'm thinking of moving out to LA to pursue, playing." And I felt like I had sort of gone as far as I was going to go in Boston playing in bands. And why not move to LA? And because everybody knows you move to LA and you make it instantly as a drummer. Yeah, obviously not. But at age 24, you have these ambitions. So I moved. I talked to Glenn on a couple of occasions, and basically he said to me, when I finally told him, "Look, I'm really serious about this. Do you think you'd have a job?" He said, "If you come out here, I'll have a job for you. You're a great guy, and you're a hard worker, and I need good people, and we're growing. So you come out and I'll hire you." So I did. I went out, and he hired me, and I hit the ground running, working there. And that was the summer of 1985. And I met so many drummers along the way, like immediately, like Greg Bissonette and Myron Grombacher, who I had on my show the other day that you saw, and a million others that are, friends to this day. And that began my job, my sort of career in the industry. I worked for Glenn for about a year or so, a year and a couple of months. And during that time, the electronic drum market had started to sort of taper off. There was competition from Yamaha and Roland. And I think, we were starting to just see by 1986, electronic drums were kind of on the decline. Acoustic drum sets were back. You had all these hair bands and, bands like Motley Crue and Poison and Rat. I mean, everybody was back to playing acoustic drums, double bass drums. And I was approached by Don Lombardi, who's the founder, owner of Drum Workshop. And I'd met Don on a couple of occasions out in LA at clinics and different events. And, we had been friendly, and he called me at home one night and said, "You've been recommended for this this position I'm looking to fill. I'm gonna get serious about making drums, and we want to introduce them at the NAMM show in January. So this was like September of 1986. And the long and short of it is, he asked if I'd be interested in talking to him about, being someone that could do artist relations and sales for drum workshops. So I went up and met with Don up at his original location in Newbury Park, Thousand Oaks, California. And I liked the operation. I liked Don a lot. And basically we worked it out so that I'd work for him. And I went to work for him in November of 86. And we launched DW Drums in January of 87, like the official launch. He'd been making drums. He had Jim Keltner and Chad Wackerman and John Hernandez and, a couple other drummers that had bought sets or that he had made sets for. But, the company wasn't an official drum company yet. It was still really a pedal company, hardware company that people knew of. So that was the beginning, 1987.
Wow. So
Yeah.
a lot of history. And
Yeah.
amazing, like how unfolded this is, of how this came about. Because, with the pedals when I was growing up, I had a Ludwig set, and then I had a hybrid. It was called stencil drums, which were Japanese drums, but it had a Ludwig, some kind of Ludwig emblem. So we thought it was Ludwig when I was growing up, and it wasn't. It was something we still don't know what it is. But we had like Rogers hardware, like pedal, like hi-hat stand and pedal, and then this DW stuff. It was Camco, or the Camco sets that were happening. And then I remember like going to the DW pedal, and I remember my mom saying, "Well, that thing doesn't look very hefty," because the Rogers pedal was really hefty. It had all these adjustments, and I go, "No, Mom, this is the thing. This is this pedal. It's real, like it's real smooth." And I as I see, as it went on, they made it better and better and better, because it was a lot thinner and less durable, but they just kept improving it. And then what I remember is the 90s when everything started hitting, with the drums, with DW drums.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huge, and so, it was something that I think that, like, some of the companies, I remember I had to have Simmons for a gig I did. So I had to buy something called an SDS-9, which was a kind of it was a MIDI set, but it had they're trying to get acoustic sounds out of it. So it was kind of a drum set, but I had to use it at the time. I had to use it for a theater gig I did, 1985. And then I did
that's when it came out. Yeah.
I did a club. We played in clubs. It was a funk band, right? And we played clubs like six to 7 nights a week, every week. And they wanted that sound, so, everything has to be electronic. They hated acoustic drums. So it kind of ties into your story. So I had like an 18 and I had a 15. That was my monitor, something called 808 was this big thing. I had to like trigger all these samples, and I had like a Kai sampler, and I had all this stuff I was trying to do. I spent like hours trying to program this thing in my garage, just trying to get it to work. And of course, half the time it wouldn't work, there'd be like double triggering and all these different things. But I had gotten into all the MIDI stuff with the Simmons and everything at that time. And I still have the drum set. It's in my garage somewhere. I don't know if the pads work anymore, but the brain is somewhere,
Yeah.
it still works.
Well, I was just going to say, I should have mentioned that too, that what gave me the sort of leg up on the gig was that I'd been playing Simmons stuff from about 1984 on, a 5 and then an SDS-7. So, I was calling there often, and I was getting to know some of the techs and some of the guys there, and Glenn, of course. So, yeah. So when I came to work at Simmons, the first couple of days, they put me on the phone just to be almost like not a product specialist, but somebody that could answer a question if somebody had a problem trying to program their SDS-7. I'd go, yeah, what you got to do is this, try that, and troubleshoot. And I did artist relations, and then eventually I moved into sales. But anyway, yeah, I remember those days. SDS nines, we couldn't keep them in stock.
Yeah. I remember
Yeah,
buying it from Guitar Center, and I still have all the I still use the hardware because the hardware it's Pearl hardware, so
right.
I still use
Yeah,
it. It never goes away. But I was into all that stuff at the time and learning electronics. So that was kind of a big step. And I know there's another guy in San Francisco who had that SDS 7 set, and I was actually going to buy that from him, but he pulled out of the deal at the last minute. So that's why I had to buy a new one. Um, but going into like at that point, how did you get how did you start working with Zildjian? Did you go from DW to Zildjian?
I did. Yeah. So it's more long stories that I'll try to condense for you. But so I lived out in Los Angeles, working for DW. My son was born in May of 1987, and that was another reason to make the change from Simmons to DW was had a baby on the way, and it was a hard decision. Glenn was so good to me by hiring me when I came out there and really allowing me to land on my feet when I got to LA. So I felt this tremendous loyalty to him, and he was so good about it when I told him I was going to take this job with Drum Workshop. It was more money, and he was great. He totally understood. So my son was born in May of '87, and about a year and a half, after he was born, sort of toward the end of '88, we've been flying back and forth so much to see, so that my family could see him and have just sort of some connection to his family, and we just had felt like the whole idea of living in LA had sort of lost its luster. We kind of wanted to move back to Boston. So Don and I came up with this idea that I would move back east, and the drums were starting to sell, and I could be the East Coast, branch or office for Drum Workshop. And I could, travel to New York, drive down there easy enough. And, he'd have a presence on the East Coast for artist relations if an endorser came through town and needed something. So it made sense. And we got creative and made this deal where I'd work out of my house basically in Boston or just outside of Boston. And I would become an independent salesman who sold DW, but I could sell other things that didn't compete, which is a pretty typical arrangement. So I was no longer salary. I was now an independent commissioned salesman selling DW. It's my primary line, but I could sell, whatever fly swatters if I wanted to, as long as it didn't interfere with DW. So I had that arrangement going and for, a few months really, and ended up at the NAMM show in January of '89. For DW, Don had flown me back out to LA to work work the DW booth. And during that NAMM show, I was approached by Zildjian I knew some of the folks there, and a man named Colin Schofield, who I knew from, bumped into him a few times in Boston. He said, I know you're back living in Boston now, and your name had come up in conversation, and we're looking to maybe expand, and would you be interested in coming down to meet with us? And I said, well, what's the job? And he was kind of, didn't really want to give too much away. He said, we can talk about it when you come down, if you want to come down and talk with us. So I gave him my resume and my business card, and then ended up coming down there, going down to Zildjian sometime after that, and must have been in February of '89. And the job was artist relations. And we got to talking about it. And I don't want to get overly detailed, but my feeling at that time was I'm selling DW drums. The drums are starting to sell well. I go to New York. I'm doing really good business. I'm starting to make some really good money. I've been with this company now for 2 years, and I've from the ground floor, and I'm starting to see the payoff. So I just don't know that I want to work in artist relations and potentially take a cut in pay. And then we found out we had another child on the way. My daughter was born later that year. So, I was 28 years old. And now thinking about my future, not thinking so much like a drummer anymore, but thinking like a business person, someone with a career, or at least developing a career. Because I realized, okay, I've worked for two companies, and here's a third company now approaching me, and obviously a bigger company, and arguably a better company that is interested in hiring me. So I want to put my best foot forward. So anyway, I went back and forth with DW with Zildjian. At the same time, I was contacted by Sabian, or their distributor, about an opening they had, um, a sales opening in New England. And so I kept that under my hat. I didn't tell either one that I was talking to the other. And I, kept that as an option to interview when the guy was coming up from their distribution company. He was coming up from Virginia the following month. So I said I'd make myself available to meet with you. And so all these things were all these balls were up in the air. I'll cut the long story short. I did let Don in on what was happening because I didn't want to leave him hanging. And he was perfectly willing to, sort of go with the flow. He said, look, if you end up taking the job with Zildjian, I'll understand. But if you take the job with Sabian, or HSS, which is their distributor, then I'd love you to still sell DW. And the problem was that this other company, HSS, also sold Sonar. And when I spoke with the sales manager, he said, well, no, you'd have to give up DW. If we hire you, you're going to sell Hohner, Sonar, Sabian. You can't sell another drum line. So there were all these sort of things that were sort of on my mind, in my head at the time. I went back for another interview with Zildjian, and this time with Armin Zildjian. And I'd met him before, but I didn't know him. But we hit it off really well. He liked me. And in the course of the interview, he turned to his daughter, Craigie, who was the HR person at that time, later became my boss. But at that time, she was the one asking all the questions. And he said to her, Craigie, look, I like this guy. Just hire him and give him whatever he wants. So I felt like, okay, well, that's a good sign. Anyway, we ended up working out the finances and making it what I felt to be, equitable, fair and equitable. And I took the job at Zildjian. I started working there in May of 1989. And so that was the transition. And I worked there for almost 24 years. And that's how I met, really got to know Tony. I had met Tony before that, but that was really the beginning of my relationship with Tony, was working at Zildjian.
So what I remember, things happening at the time of Zildjian, and we talked a little bit about some of the details before the interview, but Zildjian was huge in America, right? There was Paiste and Zildjian, and that was about it. No other companies. Sabian was starting to happen, I think, in the 80s, but they had
by the early 80s they were
early
happening.
80s.
Yeah.
But Zildjian was kind of our history, started in the United States and kind of came over and started in some suburb of Boston, right?
Right.
Norwell or something.
Started in Quincy,
Quincy.
in 1929, and then moved to Norwell in 73, I think.
Right. So when all these artists were coming together, and at the time a lot of artists were playing Yamaha, so they had at when I was at Berkeley, they had this thing called Zildjian Day, and it was at the Performance Center. And I'll never forget, I think I might have a tape somewhere of, it was like Larry London, Peter Erskine, Steve Smith, Vinnie Colaiuta, Steve Gadd, Ralph McDonald,
Louis Bellson.
Yeah.
I was there. Yeah, I was there. It was amazing. I have my T-shirt still.
And
I was still, yeah.
I just remember we were in like the third row or the fourth. I don't even remember how we did it, but it was just this thing, where we got up front, and
That's great.
I had my tape recorder. We had like a Walkman. Remember those Walkmans were very popular, and I taped everything. So it was amazing. It was amazing. It was, and I think Armand came out and maybe, gave a little speech, but they just let everybody go. It was just
Yeah.
amazing. It was like 2 day, or was it one day? I guess it was
Just the
one,
one day, one long day. Yeah.
one long
A
day.
Sunday.
And then um, at Wurlitzer, they had a drum. It was like a 4 or 5 day drum clinic extravaganza. So Lenny White, Peter Erskine, Simon Phillips, and then
Tony.
Tony was the last one, or somewhere in there. And and we're talking a little bit about this before that. He did like a 2 hour clinic, and he is what I remember, and listening back, I'm getting a little bit out of it as I listen to it and reminiscing, but he was getting a little annoyed with the audience, and people would ask him like, why are your drums yellow? What do you think of Jack DeJohnette? And he'd go, he's a
Yeah.
good drummer. What do you want me to say? What do you expect me to say? And, but he kind of went through the questions, and he took everybody's question, and he was very gracious
Yeah.
and played amazing. Like, just blew. I just couldn't believe. Like, we were just floored. Like, he just came out and played, and something else, right? But
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
actually went through all these different things, and that, when I was at Berkeley, I was in the dorms. I remember him saying like, "Oh, I just work with the ride cymbal. That's all I did for my practice. Is I work on one thing at a time. So I just had the ride cymbal in the room, in my practice room, and that's it." So I went into the dorm room, and we're not supposed to practice in the dorms, by the way. That was illegal. But I'd set up my ride cymbal, and I'd just be practicing, just the ride. And I go back, and I remember all these things that I actually took to heart, from that clinic. Like, I went in, I applied it right away. So
That's cool.
there was a lot of wise things that he actually said, and there was a lot of conflict, I think, with certain things. Like, he talked about, like, I can't find a good bass, like, I can't find a bass player that can play like Jack Bruce, and I can't find that one can play like Ron Carter. Like, I can't find this. And somebody yells at, what about Stanley Clark? And, so it was a life-changing event, that whole thing.
Yeah.
I remember Lenny
Yeah.
White actually had one of our classmates get up and play. His name was Buck. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't remember that. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Well, yeah, it was. It sticks in my mind that yeah. So the young kid, and
Yeah.
we're 19, 20, 21, something like that. So anybody want to play? And then so this kid got up and he played on Lenny's set. And, it was not easy to play because I think he left-handed, or I don't.
Well, he plays open-handed on a right-handed kit, but I think he puts his ride over here and plays it like Billy Cobham, right?
Yeah,
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 over his hi-hat. Yeah.
but he's not left-handed.
But he doesn't play left-handed like I play all
Oh, you are left-handed.
crazy.
Okay, you're
Yeah.
left. All
But I
right,
think he plays a right-handed kit with the ride kind of over his hi-hat. So he plays it, like this.
right. So open-handed right set.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I think so.
Yeah, so yeah, kid came up and played, and then Lenny was like, this kid's brave. He got up here, and all you guys are judging him, and because and you talked about that era. So I went to school with Marvin Smitty Smith and um, Gene Jackson and
Yeah.
John
Kane Watts.
Watts. Used to walk
Yeah.
around with a practice pad, worked on his left hand every day,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I mean, there was a lot of it was very thick with opinions, and everybody was criticizing each other all the time,
Yeah.
and they weren't afraid, to say it. So for people to for him to get up and play, it was like very
That's
brave, very
that's
brave.
very brave. Two quick things I can what I remember about Lenny's clinic was I remember he was playing Tama drums back then, and he played I don't know if he played Black Dot Heads like Tony. He might have, but he played his toms wide open, no muffling. But he muffled his bass drum, and someone asked him the question, or maybe he just made the comment, and he said, I want to be able to hear my toms, but I want to be able to feel the bass drum. And I thought that was a great way to explain that. Like when someone said, well, why do why don't you play the bass drum wide open if you play everything else so wide open? He said, because I want that to be felt, not heard. So anyway, I thought that was, and I took that away. I thought, like, that's like you said, you remembered some of this stuff, and I thought that's a great approach, because you do want to feel the bass drum, and to some degree hear it, but you want to feel it. But a quick Jeff Watts story, a couple of quick Jeff Watts. We're friends all these 40 years later, and whenever I see him, we talk about this. But he'd come into Wurlitzer, and he bought a Gretsch. I want to say it was an 18-inch bass drum, 14, like the most coveted Gretsch kit you'd ever want to have. A round badge, 18-inch bass drum, 1412, maybe even a snare drum that I'd taken in trade. And this was 1980, 81, and no one knew 40 years later that you could sell these drums for $5,000, that people would pay that much for them. I think I put it out for $299 or something like that. It was maybe even like Champagne Sparkle or something. It was a couple of $100. And he kept looking at it every day. He'd come and look at it. And he's like, man, I got to, and he's a Berkeley student, so he didn't have a lot of money. And I think I knocked the price down as low as I could go without losing money on it. And he ended up buying it. And then, of course, I kicked myself later for not buying it myself. I'm like, I should have just bought this drum set, man, and kept it, because I'm a Gretsch guy. And so that was around 1980, 81. I saw him at a NAMM show sometime in the late 80s, might have been the early 90s, when he was playing with Brantford. And, he was a big star at that point, really. It might have been on the Tonight Show at that point. I don't know, but he definitely, made it. And I'm thinking, I wonder if he's even going to remember me. He sees me, he goes, Johnny D. He goes, I still got those drums. And I'm like, oh man, I should have bought those drums. So gave me a big hug. But the other funny thing is, Tane would come in like on a Friday afternoon, and we had this, you might remember this. We had like a tin on the counter with like discounted drumsticks, like seconds, for like $1.50 a pair or something like that. And Tane would come in, and he'd just like grab 4 of them and go, I'll pay you Monday, like run out the door. I go, get out of here, But it was just, those were some really fun memories. And then, to see him and Smitty, I knew him and Smitty really well, in school in those days. And one, I would have been, if I had ended up going to Berkeley and not got the job there, when I had planned to, we would have been classmates, which is kind of funny, to think about that. But they would have scared the hell out of me. But anyway, just to see those guys, and Gene Jackson too, like you say, to go on and do what they've done and their success, it's just so great. So anyway.
Yeah, I didn't even know it, but there was a lot of, I think Brantford was there too.
I think so. Yeah.
Like there was definitely like different cliques, and I get the only thing that we were trying to do was just play all the time. That was just the thing, in practice. And there was something called the drummer's rug. I don't know if did you actually go into the 150 Mass and check it out?
I didn't. Yeah, way back then, and then I didn't probably again until I started working at Zildjian, and I was there all the time. But
yeah, so
yeah,
it was some old hotel. It was the weirdest setup. So they had looked like it was a lobby or something, and like they used to be a fireplace or something, and they had this kind of sunken floor, and so it was kind of the perfect level for practicing. So all the cats would hang out there. And I remember Smitty, like he would not look at you. He would not, like, he was focused, and and you'd see these guys playing, and you'd go, wow, you just wanted to like hang out with him and try to be friends with him. But he was just like, he would not break his concentration. He would be practicing, and that'd be it. And I also tell a story. There was a teacher, and I think his name was Quintus Johnson. he had a blue Gretsch, a baby blue Gretsch, and he was a teacher.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find out more about him. And I can't. I'm trying to go. I've some of my classmates are on Facebook, but nobody seems to know. Like he was a teacher. He was a drummer. He had the baby blue Gretsch drums, and he'd play in the ensemble rooms. And blow with like people, and he was amazing. And we get to, you kind of check people out in the ensemble room. It was like a little rectangle window, and you peek in and go, "Whoa, what's going
Mm,
on?"
that's
So I
cool.
don't know if you
Yeah.
remember that guy.
I it sounds vaguely familiar, but I can't say I do. But I do remember Smitty being, and I've said this to him many times. He was such a quiet guy, such a shy. Like if him and Tane came in together, um, I couldn't get two words out. He was just very, he'd put his head down and maybe try some sticks on the pad and check them out. But yeah,
And there's another guy I went to school with, Billy Kilson.
sure, yeah,
And so the story goes is that we were talking before about like kind of being, in culture shock and, being in Boston and like, oh no, I don't know if I can hang, and, just feeling like kind of depressed because everybody was so good. And I mean, I thought I was okay when I went, but, I found out how bad I was, and they give you ratings, and you'd rate low, and you had to sight read and solo and play all these styles, and just have all this ability, and I had a lot to work on. So I was kind of feeling pretty depressed, and I was in the drum room, and Billy came in, and he was 18. And I talked to him the other day, and I reminded him, I go, yeah, man, I don't know if I can take it, man. I just want to go home. He goes, yeah, man, I know what you're talking about, and we said, well, I'm just going to try to hang on. So he ended
that's
up being
cool.
a superstar, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
here we were like two little kids and kind of like trying to make it through, and then he just started growing and growing and growing. And then he's this amazing, wonderful drummer. And he was telling me he studied with Alan Dawson. I studied with Gary Chafee. And there's another guy named Robbie Gonzalez. And now I don't know if you
sure.
remember him.
I
I
do.
cannot
Yeah,
find him, but what an influence that guy was on me. And he'd come to the drum rooms, and and
yeah,
and that's how we met. He'd come to the drum rooms. He's pretty like this very good looking Italian Latino guy.
yeah,
And he would play stuff like a cross between Steve Gadd and Latin. Like he had this clean thing that he was doing, rudiments and everything. And I guess he was playing with Tigers Baku.
that's right.
So
Yeah,
so he'd be in town a lot. So we ended up becoming pretty close friends. And he would come. I'd have like a little duplex in this place called Alston, which is a suburb. And we
yep,
had like the Hell House over there, with like seven roommates. And he would come over, and I was in in like the basement, they had this furnace, thing, and that was our practice room, dirty and moldy
yeah.
and all that. That was where we did lessons. But he was a big influence on me. I just don't know what happened to him. I actually
Well,
got his number, but I can't. He doesn't answer. Go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say I haven't seen him in a few years, but he sort of disappeared for a little while, then was back again, and then I think I haven't. I saw him a few years ago though. He was up this way in Boston, and we had lunch. I think he had visited Zildjian that day, and we had lunch that day somewhere. I'd already left Zildjian at that time, so I met him at a place, and he was great. He was great. I think he was like taking pictures of all of us, and I bet I could find it. If I can, I'll send it to you. He's a sweetheart.
Yeah, he's
Robbie's a
a sweet
good,
guy. And
great drummer.
one of the things that used to happen, and this is a little bit of my backstory with teaching, is that like when you would hang out with your teacher, like my teacher in high school was a guy named Scott Morris, who was actually a top San Francisco guy at the time. And he would actually be your mentor. I mean, we would like hang, and he would give me that confidence, and
Mm.
He was in this situation working all the time, and so we had to bond, right? And then when I was at Berkeley, like some of the teachers, it was pretty intense, right? So it was hard to get to know a lot of the teachers at the time. We had Ed Kaspic and I think it was Tony Serra and Gil Graham. I don't. Some of
Bill
these guys
Graham.
are
Yeah, I
probably have
remember
passed
Gil.
away. Um, but you couldn't really get to know him very well. Um,
Yeah,
Later on, John Riley, right? Uh,
yeah, yeah,
so um, so Robbie was like one of those guys that was like your mentor. Like we would go to clubs. There was a club in Alston called the Rat Cellar, and we'd go see rock shows and top 40
yeah.
shows and hang out and eat. And so it was like kind of that thing where he was one of my big mentors. And then he made me tape everything. So that was the thing with him, is that part of the lesson is you had to, like, he had the tape recorder and you taped everything, and he would make you do the rudiments, and he had like a certain thing that he would do that nobody else was doing at the time, like incorporating rudiments and doing like coordination things and really unique things. And
That's cool.
and
Yeah,
and Chafee, I studied with Chafee. Chafee was pretty intense because he had taught like all these big names, right? So you take like 3 buses to get out to him, and he was in, like, what was that place, Forest Hills?
yeah, yeah,
Am I right?
yeah.
And
That's it. Yeah, yeah,
he would just be like, he just kind of made you feel pretty small, and then you'd kind of give you the stuff, and he was very dry. Kind of him and Ed Kaspic are kind of similar in personality because they're very dry. They don't show any emotion.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and, and he would go. I remember him saying something like, I was going home for like the break. It would be like Christmas break, and he goes, "Oh, I know you're not going to come back. I know I'm not going to see you again." Kind of thing. So maybe we could kind of go into when you first started to get involved with Tony Williams,
Sure.
and how you met him, and then how you were hired on to work with him.
Sure. Yeah. So I took the job at Zildjian, as I said, in '89, and at that time, my job was artist relations, but the company had just bought a drumstick factory and had another company making sticks for us, but we were getting very serious about like trying to be a real drumstick competitor, like really get in the market. So we bought this factory in Alabama, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Armin Zildjian had asked me um, to basically take charge of it, to run it. He said, we need someone that can design some new models and sign some big guys, some big artists, and really make it legitimate, really make it a company that's a real viable drumstick company, not like an offshoot of Zildjian Cymbals, but an actual stick company. So this was, as I said, this was 1989. 1990, I designed some drumstick models that were very popular. The Super 5A, sorry, the Super 5B, the 6A, and the Z4A, and then later the Super 5A. But those were like the first models that I designed myself, and we introduced, and they were successful. And the decision was made that we wanted to get into the signature market in terms of like having some big artists endorsing our sticks. We really didn't have anybody really that well known at that point. And I thought of Tony Williams because he was, to me, the one guy that didn't already have an endorsement deal with Vic Firth or Regal Tip or Promark. And Vic had Steve Gadd and Omar Hakim and Harvey Mason and Dave Weckl and Steve Smith and Peter Erskine. I mean, they had all these guys signed up and kind of locked up pretty tight with his company. And Dennis was with Collado at the time, and Simon Phillips and Neil Peart were with Promark. So they had all these big guys were already taken, so to speak. So Tony was a free agent, so I got in touch with him and his drum tech, because he was doing the Modern Drummer Festival that year, playing at the MD Festival in September of 1990. So leading up to that, a couple of months before we started this conversation, about Tony possibly being our first signature stick. And Tony was open to it. And basically, it was like, we're going to see each other at the MD Festival, talk about it there. Tony said, I'll give you a pair of my sticks. And if you can make them, then I'm definitely interested in talking about it. So uh, we met there, and I explained what it was. It's a royalty. You'll get, a royalty for every pair of Tony Williams sticks that we sell. And it's exciting for us, and I think it'll be good for you. And he was up for it. He trusted me. He trusted Zildjian. Um, took the sticks. I sent them to our stick factory. After the performance, he gave me a pair of his Tony Williams Gretsch 2Bs, and they were basically what Gretsch was selling at that time as their 2B drumstick with Tony's name on it. And Gretsch wasn't a stick company. They were just basically buying their sticks from Capella and providing them as a service to Tony and some other drumstick artists. So I sent them to the stick factory, and they did a great job making them. I think, on the first go round, I sent Tony the samples, to the prototypes, to check out, and he was happy with them. I think, within a month or 2 months after we first talked about it, he was good to go. So that following January of 1991, we introduced the Tony Williams signature stick, and it was the first, as I said already, the first artist series signature model, and it got a lot of people's attention. It definitely got the attention of other artists who were like, okay, so you guys are really for real on this. You got Tony Williams. That's pretty huge. And it began this relationship with Tony and me, and that I became like his contact at Zildjian, and not just for drumsticks, but I'd send him cymbals to try out, and we developed this nice friendship. I came out a couple of months later. I want to say in the early part of 1991. I flew out to San Francisco for the weekend, and we had a photo shoot for the ad to promote his drumstick. And I remember telling him that I was coming out. He's like, you're going to come out? I said, well, I want to come out. I want to supervise. And this is kind of like my baby too. And I want to make sure you're happy with how the ad's going to look. So we had a good photographer, an excellent photographer, and had a nice dinner afterward. And it was great. It was the beginning of a really great friendship. And I want to say he'd come through Boston one or two more times in the in the years to come, and we'd see each other and hang out. And he came to visit Zildjian in 1996. I'm trying to remember. It was just before the clinic tour that we did, but it was probably September of 1996. He came to the factory for a few days and helped us design some cymbals that would later be some of the input for the K Constantinople line, excuse me, which came out after Tony had passed away. But he was certainly, he was definitely, I would say, key and at least some preliminary input on kind of helping us in the right direction, if that makes sense. Like, he wasn't there for the very final steps, but he would have been if he were still with us. So, and in that time, he had signed with Drum Workshop, DW Drums, and we had collaborated on this clinic tour that we put together, which was October of 1996. And it was 2 weeks on the road all over the US. And it was incredible. It was incredible to be hanging with Tony every night, and traveling with him. And his drum tech at the time was Scott Garrison, who now works for Drum Workshop, but he had been working at Drum World in San Francisco, and had done some work for Tony. So we brought him out on the road, and it was great. I mean, he was a great tech and a great guy to have with us, because he really took care of all the nuts and bolts of it. I had done lots of that when I'd done clinic tours with other drummers, so it was nice to have with Tony, have a guy that Tony was really comfortable with, that knew Tony's setup, could really handle everything perfectly, because we were playing Tony was using a different kit every night, so there was a lot of prep work involved each day. So, yeah.
That's amazing. So Um, I guess there are a few things I'll mention, and then I'll let you
Sure.
go. One is that uh, towards the end there, he had the signature red lugs with the yellow drums. Um, I remember as because I later signed with DW and go I went to LA and went to the factory and hung with Garrison, who when I was taking lessons with Tony was there, like long hair. Remember, he had real long hair.
Yeah.
He was like kind of a
Yeah.
rocker, and so I'd known him the whole time. And then he gave me the tour. He had like some signature, like I think he had like a music stand, Tony's music stand, like the signature yellow, and he had
Mm.
some like memorabilia there. Um, but I had asked him about the double bass kit. So I don't know if you know that he had this huge kit, and
Yes.
then I go, there was a rumor that he was playing double bass and I guess he was playing A Zildjians and he was kind of going for a rock thing. Do you know anything about that?
I do, and I know I skipped over a lot of stuff. You're right. There's a lot of stuff in between. Um, in the course of the '90s, I guess you could say he was really broadening his horizons in terms of drummers and people he was listening to. He called me one day, and he said to me, "Would it be possible for you to send me the same cymbals that Lars Ulrich uses?" And I thought he was, and he had a propensity to joke around, as you know. I mean, when you got to know him and you got in his circle, he would have a little fun, and I'm thinking that's really funny. But he said, no, really. He said, and I think he had just started playing double bass drums. Greg Bissonette was giving him some lessons. Greg was coming up and taking lessons with him from Tony, and I think they'd worked out this. You could ask Greg this, but I think they'd worked out an arrangement where Tony said, "Look, I'll comp you your lessons if you teach me how to play double bass drums." And Greg was like, "Well, Tony, geez, I mean, you could learn that without me showing you. All you have to, but Tony wanted some pointers and some shortcuts, so they really bonded and had this great relationship. But so at the same time, he was looking to try some different sounds, and he said, anything I don't think I'm going to use, I'll send back to you. But I want to kind of move away from what I've been using all these years for some other things. The other handful of guys, I want to say it might have been Vinny was another drummer where he wanted to try some of the A customs, which had just come out. And Anton Fig, he had seen Anton on the Letterman show, and he loved the sound of his cymbals. And he said, "What's he using?" And I said, "Well, he's using some K's and maybe some A's." He said, "Could you send me like the hi hats and everything that?" And I think he even asked me for Anton's number, and I knew Anton wouldn't mind, so I gave him Anton's number. And Anton called me like later that day or the next day and said, with his South African accent, he said, "I just got off the phone with Tony Williams. I said, I hope that was okay." He's like, "Are you kidding? That was unbelievable. I can't believe he called me. I'm kind of shaking from talking to him." And, he said he wanted to know what tuning, and he wanted to know about, my cymbals and all this other stuff. And I said, yeah, wants me to send like a duplicate set of what you use to him. So, or replicated set. So, might even Dennis Chambers too. He was really starting to, sort of, as I say, move away from just what you think of him playing. But at the end of the day, when we did that clinic tour, and that was in 1996, and it was 4 months before he died, sadly, he was playing his regular setup. He was playing his 15-inch hi-hats. He was playing, um, I think it was a 22-inch K ride. I think it was a 22. And the K crashes, and I think he had one A crash. Gosh, I should remember, but it's been a long time now.
Oh yeah, no, it's
So
been a long time.
yeah,
I think that what I remember in the lessons that I had is that he could be very strict, and he was very. Sometimes he would lash out at people. Um, but once you got like he kind of went through that shell, like he kind of opened up.
Yeah.
So I remember taking some lessons. I remember somebody trying to take his picture one time. We were a drum roll, and he was no. He was no. I said no, and like he got real stern, and you
Yeah.
know, put your camera away, and then you go back to the room. You know, it's like, you go back to the room, get in the room. I'll be there in a second. I was like, oh. But you know, after he kind of got through that initial, like he could be real hard. He kind of told you the story of you know his life, and
Mm.
he told me, hey, you know, I don't take shit from anybody, because that's what my mom was like. It's not because I'm a musician. It's like I have that you know, attitude that my mom gave me, and
Mm.
so that's where I get it from. And then he continued to tell me the story about everything, about like Miles, about fusion, about, you know, because I kind of grew up on that. That was my thing in the 70s. So he told me the whole, like, he sat down and just went through everything. So my point being is he could be like a very warm, compassionate, you know, hang out, feel good, like when he was kind of like he got loose and he felt good. But he also could be very, you know, contradictory, and he could be very harsh. And I don't know if you
Yeah.
experienced any of that, you know, with the kind of the two sides.
Yeah. He definitely had a guarded side. I agree. And I think um, I would, I'm thankful. I can say this honestly, and I'm thankful that I can say it, that I think in the, if you were to say there were 6 or 7 years that we were in very regular contact, very, very few times was there ever any weirdness in any way. Like, I think he really appreciated, I think he not just me, but I was the face of Zildjian, and I think he appreciated what we were doing, what I was doing. Um, I remember how, like I said, he was so happy that I came out to San Francisco for the photo shoot and for the ad, because I told him, I said, this is really important to the company, and we want to get this right. We want to make sure you're happy. I don't want to present in a few weeks an ad proof for you to approve and you not like the picture, and because he was very, he's very, um, that was very important to him, those kinds of things, and that I think that represented respect. And I think he appreciated that I understood that. I'm sure you did. And that he, that was something that was key, like not trying to pass off some ad in a magazine with a really awful photo of him that he probably would end up rejecting or going, really, this is what you guys think of this, so just sort of being a little bit more strategic about those types of things with him, because he was Tony and he was very special. When he came to visit us at Zildjian, he was married to Colleen. This was in 1996, and we sent him 2 first-class plane tickets, and like didn't even think about it. It was just, it wasn't even. And Zildjian didn't do that for a lot of people. Steve Gadd, Tony, Max Roach lived in New York, or Roy, so they didn't have to fly first class because it was a. But point being that, he appreciated that kind of respect, and that we appreciated him. So anyway, my point being to all that on the clinic tour there were a couple of occasions where, I could tell he wasn't. It's pretty grueling. We were traveling comfortably, but it's still, you're on the road, you're in a hotel room. You got to get up early in the morning, go to the airport, deal with all that stuff, get on the plane, get to the next town, get into the hotel, maybe have a little bit of time before we head over to the store or the, auditorium to do the sound check. And, so it's pretty grueling. And on a couple of occasions, one in particular in Memphis, I remember he had this routine when after he played his solo, and he played pretty much the same solo every night, which was just phenomenal. He would say, "Are there any questions?" And he'd pause and he'd say, "Because if there are no questions, we're out of here." And he'd look at me and I'd go, like, "Oh, okay, let's hopefully there'll be some questions," because I'm thinking, Mr. Music Dealer, music store owner isn't going to like us just taking off, excuse me. So in Memphis in particular, Jim Pettit, the owner of Memphis Drum Shop, a very good friend, he like went gave us this, beautiful, put us in a hotel. I'm trying to think. It was a really famous hotel in Memphis. Can't believe I can't think of it, but got us these beautiful hotel rooms, and picked us up in a limousine and had this great dinner planned for us afterward. And so Jim was really, he goes full boat when he does these things. Everything's first class all the way. So Tony says, "Are there any questions?" And everybody was just sort of just in awe. I think everybody was just trying to calibrate and catch their breath, and he's saying, "Well, if there's no questions, we're out of here. Any questions?" And I think he even said, "I'm going to count to 3." And finally, there was a lot of tension in the room because I'm looking at Jim Pettit and he's looking at me like, "This can't be like you guys. It can't be over, in 30 minutes or 40 minutes, So one person asked a question, and then that broke the ice for more people. And all of a sudden, whatever tension that was there was gone. He was laughing, he was telling stories, and it just took that one person to just sort of break the ice. And we had a great time. We went out to dinner afterward. We were telling jokes and telling stories. And so, yeah, it was sort of touch and go for about 2 minutes.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how I remember the clinic in Boston. We're talking about how he would just go, he would kind of catch his breath, and he'd do this amazing solo. And any questions? And that
Yeah.
was it. But everybody would fire away at that point.
Yeah.
And I think Terry Lynn Carrington was in the audience, and he'd go, "Oh, don't I know you? Are you a drummer?"
Oh, that's funny.
Because I went
Yeah.
to school with her. I think I had a class with her, but everybody was there at that time.
Yeah.
Hey, John, I don't want to keep you. I know you probably got to go, but maybe we can continue later. Uh,
Sure. Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Are you still working? Are you doing another job now? Are you at home?
No,
You're
I'm at home. I retired. Yeah. When I left Zildjian in 2013, I was more or less retired at that time. Um, I knew I wasn't going to go work for somebody right away. And I sort of left my options open. And then I got back into playing again, to tell you the truth. I hadn't played in about 20 years. And I got a call from some of my old best pals who I played in bands with as a teenager. And it's just a little, classic rock cover band. And they asked me to sub to fill in for a gig, and I filled in and never left. And that was in 2014. And we were working regularly right up until a year ago, like everybody else when you were talking about it, and the gig stopped. But, we're optimistic here, Rob, that I mean, we're already hearing from some of the places that we play that they're hoping to bring music back, maybe over the summer or in the fall. And so I'm optimistic that we'll be playing again. But to answer your question, I've been doing some consulting, and I work with some drummers in a sort of management capacity, but I have no interest in working for any companies. I'm kind of past that now. So it's different time, and I was in there for, kind of the good years, I think. And I have really great memories of my time working in the industry, and it's better to just sort of like go off into the sunset. So
I gotta say that your From My Drum Room episodes are amazing.
thank you. Yeah.
I'm this is kind of something I'm going into, like going into different things. I've never worked for anybody. I've always been a self-employed musician. I've enjoyed, like I got to be involved with all these great people. When I was here, another story is I met Steve Smith at one of the Tony gigs at this place called Kimball's West, which was Franklin and Grove in San Francisco. And I've had a relationship with Steve Smith ever since, who's been another mentor.
Yeah.
He's also, like we say, at the funeral, and we've shared kind of influences of Tony, going back and forth. And I did on my first CD, I did a big drum solo dedicated to Tony, and just he passed away. I think I did my CD at the end of what was it, like 1999 going into 2000. So I had this big solo that I dedicate to him and Max Roach.
That's great.
So, so yeah, I mean, what you're doing and the whole thing of like bringing people together and these stories, because they're all my heroes, all these people I grew up with. And kind of now we're going into this another kind of vein, because a lot of these great people are not with us anymore,
I know. Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
and
know.
so what you're doing, that service you're doing, is really amazing. And
Oh, thanks,
Myron,
man.
it's like I grew up with that. You guys talked about that drum set, and Pat Benatar. I remember that drum set. I remember I
Yeah.
growing up, and that guy is amazing.
He's a
And
great drummer. Yeah.
and he's like, oh, I'm just self-taught. It was like, what? It's like I just started playing one day. It was like, what? And it's just had that amazing style. We always we had to learn all the songs, for cover bands in the day, so you try to
Yeah, me too.
transcribe all that stuff and whatnot. So yeah, it's just really amazing what you're doing. And
Thank you.
I really love it. And I was going to say one thing before we go, and then, you had mentioned something about reading, and I want to mention a good book is Understanding Rhythm by Michael Loren, which is a
Yeah.
great book for just doing, if you're just going to do like modern reading. I
Mhm.
like it better than the Louis Bellson book, because it's a little bit more, kind of has a nice progression. It's not as confusing. So I just want
Okay.
to throw that out
I
there.
I did start studying with a friend of mine who's also a lefty drummer, a guy named Chris Anzalone, who lives here in the Boston area, last year. And we were going pretty well for a while. Then just different things were happening in both our lives, and we took a little break. And we were in touch not too long ago. And I said, "Yeah, I got to get back into it." But I've been working off the syncopation book and the Rick Latham funk book, Rick's book, and but that's great. I know Michael Lauren too. I know him from when maybe he's still at the Collective, but I remember when he was at Drummers Collective in New York. I used to go see him. So, um, but thank you for that tip. And if I can plug my little show, it's live from my drum room, and I do them typically on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and you can see them all on my YouTube channel, which is my name, John DeChristopher, live from my drum room. You can find it on there, I'm sure. So
Yeah.
subscribe.
Yeah, it's awesome, and I know it's growing real fast, because it's
Thanks.
yeah, once you start watching it, you kind of get addicted. So, you start binging. All right, John.
uh,
Hey, I won't take up your time anymore, but maybe we can continue another time. And
yeah,
like I said, I'm trying to do the podcast and try to really honor Tony and my experiences from him and his influence on my life, and and how he influenced others. So it'd be awesome.
yeah. All right.
All right, John. Well, have a good day
Thanks,
or
Rob.
good night, and we'll talk soon.
You got it. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you got a lot out of it. Please check out my website, robhartdrumstudio.com, and there you can check out my online courses that feature the basics of rhythm, reading rhythms, hand and feet technique, groove independence, and much more. You can also sign up to my mailing list to receive a free introductory lesson. Until next time, happy practicing.